So why would they? Post-acid trip or just post-acid? Oh, so it's really the post part is going too far for me.
He's actually a former student, well-known poet, writer, fundraiser for the arts. We've come up with a term, post-philosophy.
I mean, I'm sure there are some bookshelves, but
a post-philosophy. Nobody talks about post-philosophy.
They charge $50,000 for having clothes like that.
Yeah, I got to spend more time on the piece. I'm really jazzed about that too. About jazz. About that performance. Still reeling in my mind. George Lewis. Yeah, well, I basically my mind was all set. You know, I play jazz piano when I was done. I didn't know that. I didn't know that you still come down here. I think jazz is the new group post philosophy. One age post philosophy, you know. I get too excited about it. I'm teaching this songwriting class in the last week. There was this lesson on like composition versus songwriting. Is there different what to do? So I brought in these like pictogram like compositions from the 70s and all that stuff. These are just kind of like that's what we Roger that. I just want to make sure. I almost thought the end for this class for the presentation I should just kind of do
No, I think like
of speed and intensity. It's not. I think that we might be about 1,000
Yeah. But if you buy something, oh, thank you. Like,
yeah, speak up for
your business.
It's already
yeah.
I'm gonna clarinet.
I'm going to bring in 24 guitar pedals, stereo amps, the lights.
I mean, I wish you remember. Actually, somebody I told that I was going to school with you. Like, apparently, it's legendary.
I've not seen your stuff. I put a picture of it in my thesis article. Okay, I'll just set it down. Actually, I didn't. Send it to my colleagues to format and go read it before we publish it. So there's a vacant space down here at the end. Does that belong to somebody who's not here yet?
The what?
The vacant space down at the end. Does that belong?
Andy's. It's the empty square.
It's the
It's the empty square that's circulating.
Yeah. Although, like 10 minutes into the class, we're all gonna get up and be like, "We gotta move down" or whatever, like they do in Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah.
The mascot, yeah.
Well, the problem is you're looking all three dimensions at that. You need to kind of flatten it out.
I'm also way too sober.
Roger's green sugar cubes for that.
Yeah, I got an outlet for it.
No, we just thought we'd all drop
Yeah,
it.
should have had a start of an hour before.
It's cool if I write my
It'd be
10 hours.
kicking in about.
It'd be a long lecture.
We can talk about the Kleineman.
All right, so is this it, or are we?
I don't know where Andy is.
Andy's out of town.
Oh.
Alright. There's nobody else. So let's see, who's on for the night? Are you recording? Are you recording?
Yeah, I already hit everybody.
Okay, so, do you guys wanna go first, or you want me to sort of frame and contextualize what I think logic and sense is about, and then you'll probably have to work within that straitjacket, or you want the kind of free, open, you know, fullness of your own heterogeneous expression. You know, so then I can try to, you know, thematically redistribute, you know, whatever single points expression is. I can either go the first hour and then turn over to you, or I'll turn over to you for an hour, and then I'll take the second one. Which would you prefer?
I don't know. You think that we're going to lecture first might be helpful, or? I mean, there's no. I don't
It
think
could
there's.
be destructive too.
Yeah. Do we have to do like a clear demarcation between like our presentation and your?
No, it can be totally associated.
Okay. Okay. Let's start with a lecture and then. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Well, I appreciate your honoring my mode of presentation with the term lecture. I haven't lectured since 1977. But, let's say you give a talk, you give a reading. All right, so the logic of sense is probably, philosophically speaking, Deleuze's strangest approach. I don't know if you already got that idea. You know, I mean, not to say that everything we read by Deleuze isn't strange. In fact, we are on a kind of, you know, rising trajectory of strangeness as we kind of go through this select corpus, right? But in many ways, this book deals with some of the really underlying, you know, determining issues of much of his later work. And you might say that when we get to Any Oedipus and to Thousand Plateaus, you know, which were collaborations with Felix Guattari, we're seeing in some ways the kind of full expression, the kind of, to use his terminology, the donation of sense to this whole philosophical enterprise, right? You know, because the whole question of sense is not really a philosophical issue. The question of sense is an issue of communication. Philosophy is only one portion of this vast, you know, multi-dimensional relationship-driven spectrum of meaning and sense. And so, did any of you notice kind of what might be called the irony of the title? The logic of sense? Because, you know, nobody that does what is called logic that I know, even those who are the Deleuzean epigons, you know, who claim to be, you know, taking Deleuze, you know, into the academic world. I'd say, you know, it's been commented repeatedly that, you know, the problem with philosophers are their followers. You know, the real trouble with Kierkegaard are the Kierkegaardians or the Derridians, and of course the same as the Deleuzians. I mean, in some ways, you know, I feel very uncomfortable now that Deleuze is popular because there's all these different readings of Deleuze, there are all these different takes on these Deleuze, there are all these different kind of, you know, inspired applications of Deleuze to that aspect of philosophical theory and so forth. And Deleuze never intended to be applied to anything. You know? So let's put it this way. When we say a Deleuzian reading of X, you know, please use the smell test for that. A Deleuzian reading of X is you know, something to be considered very suspect. You know, because one of the fundaments, if I can use that, of the whole Deleuzian corpus is the realization there is no equal signs after X. There are only arrows, or there are only what you might call broken equalities. Because, in a sense, every formal determination of anything is simply situated within a circulation of signs and indicators and of promptings and forces which take on a kind of signifying power in a very limited way, but are also somehow related to everything else that's going on at that moment. So what is the logic of sense really about? Is it really about logic, or is it an effort to somehow come up with a operative vocabulary, a way of developing certain what we might call memorable means that we can use to try to somehow formalize, I hate to use that word, not formalize in an abstract way, but formalize in terms of a matter of discursive repetition. To formalize the kind of new image of thought that Deleuze is constantly sketching using a whole host of metaphors, of associations, of implications and implications, of insinuations about this and about that. Now, in some ways, Deleuze is much more, effective than Nietzsche, who knew the art of the put down and also of hyperbole, as well as the quick aphorism that would suddenly shatter, whatever sacred cow that we happen to be, have gilded on our mantelpiece and so forth. Deleuze doesn't do that. Deleuze is always probing, or to use his own term, he's always provoking, or use another word of Deleuze's own phraseologies, which is right here in this book, he's perverting. In fact, that's one of the most interesting passages in this book, where he describes philosophy as perversion. Now, I don't want to talk about that. You dander up and say, okay, well, now I can put on my resume, whatever you're doing that for. I am a Deleuzian. I'm a philosophical person. But there's a kind of logic to that kind of strange locutionary act of Deleuze here, because he talks about the renversement of Platonism, the reversal of Platonism. Now, the French term, which you have to use as renversement, doesn't really mean reversal strictly in the English sense. It has more of the sense of this kind of, odd transformation. So it's not turning back. It's not putting something back where it was. The whole notion of the reversal of Platonism, which is not, in a sense, going back to the pre-Socratics. Deleuze is not doing anything remotely comparable to Heidegger. Now, he's not trying to get us to think what has been unthought before, Plato must know a lot. What he's getting us to do is try, in some ways, to see through what is going on at multiple, simultaneous, and also what we might call parallel levels. In some ways, the logic of sense is a very careful and precise mapping of the intersecting and interpenetrating multiple universes out of which what we call Western philosophy is built. So there are a number of things going on, and they're going on all at once. And they're going on not as polyphony, but as a kind of cacophony. But just like Deleuze is always somehow seeking a kind of dynamic middle term. So the struggle of philosophy is not to somehow bring cosmos out of chaos, nor is it the purely sort of rambunctious artistic project of turning cosmos into chaos, but it is somehow to develop a language of what he calls chaosmos, to speak always at the edge, to use his own words, which are found in this particular book, somehow to give voice to the clamor of being that exists in this realm that we call the frontiers. The frontier is not of knowledge, the frontier is not of meaning, but the frontier which is always the betweenness of language and that which frightens us almost, that which is pre-articulate, or that which somehow is always destroying whatever articulate configurations we happen to manage to bring about. And of course, this is somehow coming up with a new, following the great genius or proto-genius of French postmodernism, Henri Bergson, with this whole notion of time. Philosophy is about temporality. And the temporality of philosophy is not somehow a la Heidegger, of somehow situating ontology, giving it the fourth dimension the way Einstein did, but a temporality which is totally embedded everything that we can possibly say within the philosophical argument. So that when Nietzsche says in this book Zarathustra, where Zarathustra announces that one of the goals of the philosophy of the future is to be able to articulate being as pure becoming, that's what the reversal of Platonism really kind of applies. All right, now that's still speaking, within the register of metaphysics. But how does this work? Well, remember, this course is called Deleuze and Semiotics, and Deleuze comes out of the post-structuralist tradition. There's a whole body of literature about how signs work, about how signification takes place. A lot of this can be or is locked into the language of Jacques Lacan and psychoanalysis. In some ways, you might say Deleuze is taking the insights of later psychoanalysis, not the Freudian metapsychology with its whole clunky, worldview of, layers upon layers under which the unconscious lies, and the sort of welling up, the pressing forth of various kind of primordial, almost cosmic, instincts. But in a sense, seeing instinctuality, seeing what generally was considered throughout most of the 20th century as the irrational region of human experience, of being able to somehow talk about this rational experience, irrational region of human experience, with a whole new quasi-linguistic rationality. The rationality of signification. The rationality of the genesis of science. Hence, Deleuze and semiotics. So the logic of sense is about this ontology of science. You say, why do we need science? Why can't we just talk about the way the world is and all its, schizo, infinite extensiveness? No, why can't we just speak like schizophrenics? Is that what schizoanalysis is? Is somehow teaching philosophy, how to artfully stutter? Or is it like, the usual rationalist critics will say, well, this is just some kind of baptism of madness, or at least of altered states of consciousness, and so forth, I mean, in a sense, this is Colorado, I suppose we could, though we can't here on campus, because they have rules against it on campus, but, we wanted to follow that false path down, a deceptive rabbit hole, we could say, well, we'll just all come in stone next week, and see what's on our minds. So that's not what Deleuze is doing. Okay? So this is much, much more sophisticated. Because it just hit me while I was preparing for this lecture. Because I've been agonizing to try to figure out what's going on in the presidential election right now. And I've come to the conclusion that the only way you can somehow comprehend the presidential election is to do a Deleuzian reading. I mean, most of you are, probably faux Deleuzians because, you're just so horrified by the Donald Trump phenomenon, not realizing that there, is a whole, other side, that we call Hillary Clinton politics, Hillary Clinton world, which keeps getting sort of, disseminated through WikiLeaks and so forth. But, we've got to fight it. I mean, I'm in my Facebook friends who can see this election as the apocalypse. And I have to let you know, I am not an advocate of any of the candidates, third party candidates, but I don't see this as the apocalypse. I see this election as a kind of revelation of really what you might say is, the forces that are really behind politics. Maybe this really is a manifestation of what I call the force of God. And it's like a lot of dice stories, it's kind of getting fun to watch. I just want to let you know, as of this week, I've overcome my depression, and I am now, ready to be quite entertained. Whatever the outcome is. And so, if you get all passionate about one of these candidates, if you get apocalyptic, that's your sign that you're not even getting what Deleuze is all about. All right, so just think. I mean, in some ways, politics is the opium of academics. We have this whole sophisticated idea of what's right and virtuous and moral, how this is going to somehow be incarnated within this idealized polis, when in fact, going back to Le Ford's distinction between le politique and la politique, between rough and tumble politics rules and kind of idealized version of civic responsibility and so forth. Politics is somehow this realization of what is the human essence. Realize there are no humans. No, there is only the event, and we are living in the layer 2 series that Deleuze is talking about of the event. Which is just getting expressed in this crazy election. This is sort of a confessional remark, but it was very comforting to realize that. You think, well, you can't vote for either of these candidates, and so what are you going to do? And you realize, well, maybe that's the problem. You're asking the wrong questions. Anyway, I know some of you have. I don't like to bring politics into seminars, but I just have to share it. Because I'm thinking that, maybe I will try to, somehow look through step through the looking glass, on election night, and kind of see what's going on there. But anyway, it's not about politics. Not here. You want me to take side. Because I've got Facebook posts that have said, both sides, that how could you be for Hillary or how can you not be with her and so forth. But why are we doing this? Because somebody's going to win the election and something is going to happen, and there are certain forces that are all shaping us and driving us and, roiling about in ways, and somebody's going to be unhappy. And perhaps the Stoics had a point. This is the best election to be Stoic that you could probably ever come up with. So, all right. So let's talk more about the reversal of Platonism. He says on page 53, to reverse Platonism is to remove essences and substitute events in their place as jets of signification. Page 53. To reverse Platonism is to remove essences and substitute events in their place as jets of signification. What do you think he means by that? Because we're really talking about events, right? So what is an event? Is an event something that just sort of happens? Is it like a flash mob? Is it a chair that is thrown in the midst of a lecture? Is it a black swan? Is it something that is totally unexpected? Is it an anomaly? Is an event something that you can recognize and record? Are all Deleuzian events, in theory at least, do they all have their own kind of YouTube correlate? Or is an event something that takes place on the surface? Or is it always something hidden, beneath, below? Well, Deleuze says that we can't really talk about what's going on down there, right? And when we do talk about what's going on down there, we get Alice in Wonderland. We get strange, kind of paradoxical, nonsensical sorts of contiguities that always seem to come out in ways that ultimately we can't decipher any other way than as nonsense. And yet Deleuze has a lot of good things to say about nonsense, does he not? What is nonsense the opposite of sense? Is nonsense contradiction? What do you think Deleuze means by that? Let's look at further what he says. He says events are differential. Events are regulated by propositions. So on the one hand, we have the proposition and we have the event. Now, is the event that's sort of something that happens in a pre-linguistic sort of manner? I mean, is it kind of an immaculate conception? Is it something mysterious that sort of comes out of nowhere? Is it the true Erewhon that he talks about in Difference in Repetition? Is that sort of news from nowhere? Or is it always
inseparable from the Language Act, or what modern analytic philosophy calls the Speech Act. Is it simply, just all those kind of weird sort of images that flow into my mind as I'm trying to somehow, pull together what I want to say? Is it all that, are all those kind of instinctual, imaginative, promptings, or as the Germans would say, Triebe, pulses, some of them take on a kind of fleeting, imaginary, form. Is it all those pictures of everything from, memories of my childhood, all that stuff that gets sorted out in dreams that I can't remember the next morning, all that sort of pre-linguistic content of what Freud identified as the unconscious, somehow swirling together and somehow in, like a 1,000 gnats, that are somehow flying around in front of the light of my consciousness. I'm able to grab one or squat one, or put a bottle together and gather them into the bottle and say, aha, now I have within this bottle a proposition. Is this Wittgenstein's fly in the fly bottle that I can no longer get out, or that I can release back into that swarm of pre-linguistic evental gnats? Is it both external and external? But now somehow I've been able to domesticate it, train it, be able to use it in the form of a proposition. Is that what's going on? Or is it more than that? Is the logic of sense, does the logic of sense reside solely in the proposition that we were finally able to get out and put together, sort of like when you figured out, a diagram from a piece of unassembled IKEA furniture? Is that what the proposition is? Or is it the other way around? Is the proposition just a kind of condensation, a kind of simulacrum, a kind of false quasi-representation of something that is non-representable, something that belongs to this primitive, wild, barbarian, id-like, underside of human consciousness and experience that philosophy never wants to touch, or hasn't wanted to touch since Plato, because Plato always wanted the philosopher to be sitting in the chariot, regal-like, holding on to the reins, and making sure the horses never got out of control. Or is it a question of, is the philosopher leading the horses, or the horses leading the philosopher? Or is the image of Plato's chariot of both the philosopher sitting with the reins and the horses, is it all part of something which is even more mysterious? Well, this is where the problem of sense comes into play. We talked about sense last week, did we not? Talked about sense for the last 2 weeks. Indifference and repetition. Can somebody here speak up? Don't be shy. What sense do you have of sense from difference and repetition? Where does sense come to play? Deleuze has 3 terms. He has common sense, good sense. These are terms he gets from the history of philosophy. And he says, but there's something else called sense. What is that? What's the sense of sense?
says it's the effect.
It's the effect. Okay, good. Yeah.
So I'm on page 7. Third way down the paragraph. Sense is thus inseparable from a new kind of paradoxes which mark the presence of nonsense within sense, just as the preceding paradoxes marked the presence of nonsense within signification. This time we are confronted with paradoxes of subdivision ad infinitum, and also with paradoxes of the distribution of singularities. Inside the series, each term has sense only by virtue of its position relative to every other term.
Aha. Okay. Keep on.
Okay. But this relative position itself depends on the absolute position of each term relative to the instance equals x. The latter is determined as nonsense and circulates endlessly through the series. Sense is actually produced by the circulation as sense, which affects with an A, both the signifier and the signified. In short, sense is always an effect. It is not an effect merely in the causal sense, it is also an effect in the sense of an optical effect or a sound effect, or even better, a surface effect, a position effect, and a language effect. It spreads out over, extends itself the length of the surface. It is strictly co-present to and coextensive with its own cause, and determines this cause as an immanent cause, inseparable from its effects, pure nihil or x, outside the effects themselves. So it's an effect, but it is not an effect that is like the predicate of a cause.
Right, it's that effect that is correlated with the cause. In fact, the whole theory of causality and effect, which David Hume criticized, which Deleuze is very much influenced by. He says, effect and cause is only a constant relation, or a constant conjunction. And this constant injunction, therefore, we want to assign some kind of metaphysical, almost entitative reality. That, of course, Kant picked up on that and said that from this, the fact that we can't, discern causes from effects. Nietzsche, by the way, thought that assigning causes to effects was simply an act of valuation. But the fact that we can't automatically assign causes to effects, that in fact cause and effect are just simply pulled, they're relations that are kind of pulled out of the swirl of cognitive data. The fact that we assign cause and effects means somehow that we are trying to make our own statement about something without trying to get at what the genesis of our trying to make that statement is. And so sense is Deleuze's way, in many respects, of dealing with not only Hume's, but Nietzsche's and Kant's problems. Is that how do we somehow enunciate meaningful relationships between things? And what Deleuze is saying, we don't look back, because that's the only way we can somehow figure out what a cause is. We can say, that happened before. Of course, that could lead to the fallacy and logic of post-hoc propter hoc. Because it comes afterward, therefore it must be as a result of it. And so, when in fact it says looking back, we are simply relying, according to Deleuze, on something called memory to project a backward series, when in fact the effect that we're talking about, the sense, is part of a projection of a forward series. These are what he called the dual series that is part of every experience and also every philosophical determination. This dual series that runs both into the past and goes forward in this process of temporality that is ultimately, embedded in what we can experience, but we can only infinitely divide.
which he calls eon, the Greek word for the eternal, but it's not the eternity of timelessness or static being. It's the eternity of pure dynamic potentiality and pure dynamic memory. Because remember, you can't have time without memory. You can't talk about temporality without looking back, nor can you talk about it without anticipating the future. And we know from contemporary physics, particularly the so-called many worlds hypothesis, which has become pretty much starting to be an accepted postulate of theoretical physics, that there are always these different sequences out there where we decide to do this or we decide to do this. Deleuze would say it's the results of different dice throws. Deleuze doesn't want to bring personal causation into this, but nevertheless, anything is possible, and all series can be projected from every particular possibility, and see that particular world out there and say that we always have to look backward and forward, and how these things all push us forward in terms of trying to articulate it. This is where Deleuze's whole metaphor of stuttering becomes so important. What do I want to say? I have to say it, and it finally comes out. But the minute I say it, it's like, well, yeah, but you didn't really say it. There's still more, and that's exactly the sense. That's the sense, because the sense is always the more of what could be said, or the more of what could happen, or the more of where it could have gone, and on and on and on and on. In other words, there is no such thing as meaning with a capital M. There are simply these infinite series that are driving in two directions at once. On out into infinity, let's call them M1, M2, M3, and so forth and so forth. On into infinity, and also backwards in terms of trying to understand the past. Like, did I really do that? Why did I do that? Did I really mean that? Am I remembering correctly? Did that really happen? Or if it really happened, how do I understand it? And ultimately, in Nietzsche's moral ethical question, can I affirm it no matter how I remember, no matter what it was? Can I say, not thus it was, but yes, I will? So it's that infinite coagulation of meanings and potential meanings within the pregnant present that is always somehow coming together in that moment of experience is what is really behind what we call the Cartesian pogoda. There is no I. There is only the event of meaning now that is constantly sucking up like a giant vacuum cleaner, or like a huge white shark that is devouring hundreds, if not thousands, of little fish potential meanings that we've used somehow to decipher our life in the past, and readjusting them, and going on in new ways with new possibilities of meaning. That's what we mean by the event. Okay? But here's the problem with eventalness. And and remember, Deleuze's Badiou's whole theory of the event, his magnum opus, his 2-volume work, Being an Event, which he formalizes. He tries to formalize this kind of theory, which Deleuze can only, give us through poetic language and metaphor. He tries to say, well, there's something called set theory, which Deleuze understands. Set theory somehow can give us a true mathesis universalis, of the event. But I think Deleuze would have a serious problem with that, because it's the very nature of the event is it defies any form of formalization. You know, and this is why I said Deleuze is so hard to read, because we're always trying to draw a line and say, I get it, I get it. And the minute we say, I get it, you know, we move on. You know, we have a new sort of line of flight in his discourse that kind of takes us to another direction. And that's the point. You know, the logic of sense is about the logic of implicit meaning that is always being thrown out there in front of us. That the event is always emitting signs, to use that locution that Deleuze employed in Difference of Reputation. It's always emitting signs that are carrying with us new and possible and creative senses. This is not at all about sensation. This is not at all about empiricism in the traditional way. This is not Kantian empiricism. What Deleuze means by transcendental empiricism, he says pretty much straightforward. He talks about the empirical as being the nomadic distribution of point. I'm going to point a word here that's not Deleuze, but I think it'll capture a sense of Deleuze. The nomadic distribution of point senses that lose their sense while they're generating more senses. So just what I'm doing here in this talk, you know, I'm letting language flow. I'm letting the Holy Spirit inspire me, you know, with words that weren't pre-prepared. Yes, I have the notes in front of me, but very little of what I'm saying. The notes are only prompts. They're only, you know, kind of vectors that are taken in a certain way. You know, that in a sense, the more that we use our imagination and what Deleuze calls, you know, exploring a new image of thought, the more we can see these dynamic possibilities, the more they are no longer abstractions, but are memories of real experiences, you know, fabulated memories of experiences that haven't really happened yet, possibilities, poetry, you know. I mean, this is why readers of Deleuze are always so fascinated with Borges. Because Borges' novels are always about imagined worlds that are very real in a concrete way. They are, you might say, the lines of flight of the imagination is developed through a kind of Deleuzian trajectory of sense. So what makes sense sensible? What makes sense work as sense, according to Deleuze, is the fact that it is always, in a sense, deferring. It is always producing new differences. It is not finalizing itself, but the minute we think we're at the level of finality, it explodes before our eyes. You know, when Deleuze wrote Logic of Sense, you know, these very, you know, sophisticated, graphically advanced video games were not on the market. But I know Professor Serber is doing those courses on philosophy of video games. I want to say to you that a Deleuzian philosophy is in many ways a video game. And what is it about video games? Video games are not predetermined, they're not prearranged. A video game has a certain logic to it. It's all about pixels and, you know, bits and bytes. That's what makes a video game. But from these bits and bytes, from these little diodes, can be generated incredible virtual experiences. That's what Deleuze is trying to get us to imagine. Deleuze proposes a philosophy that is in many ways not non-philosophy. Deleuze actually used that term the way Laura Well talks about it. But philosophy is post-philosophy. You know, it's not philosophy, it's aesthetics, but philosophy that is a true, genuine aesthesis, a production of sense, which is what the Greek word aesthesis really means in its original kind of connotation. All right, so I have more to say about this, but it's a great time. Drink water. So we'll let our presenters go and check it out, and we'll pull your attention to some more passages and hopefully try to sort some of this out in the third hour. Stay great.
You mean just for this section? Or just for sex? Well, we're not going to talk about just sex for an hour. Right. Right. Okay. Oh, well, I'm just saying that just for that particular decade. Yeah.
Yeah, why don't you turn that toward them?
What appears a single person from that angle by moving this go on. Okay, would you want to get started?
Now that Kevin's not here, part of it.
Yes. Yeah.
Or are you gonna kind of deconstruct me for this?
I'm not looking to, but. Sound like a brisk tall boy you got there?
Yeah, the other machine was still that, but
You got into the downstairs. Oh, you are happy with this?
well, they have some new machine that has the Lipton brisk the regular soda machine.
That machine's been sold out of everything.
Been sold out since I got here. Like, I mean, since I started school.
The one time I always use the machines on the first floor, that's what happened. That's what using on the second floor, and I got using on the second floor. Get my stuff. So I had to sell the machine on the first floor. All right.
Yeah, so I guess we focused on three main things when we were reading Deleuze. Obviously, each of our interpretations aren't perfect, and we've talked about this a lot, so we'll try to keep it as, like, on topic as possible. But, I mean, as far as we're concerned, like, this is a dialogue, so any questions or comments anytime, like, participate, provocations are invited. Yeah. So the first point I want to talk about was this notion of, like, the reverse of Platonism, but Carl had mentioned that. On page 2, though, this is a point of clarification that I kind of wanted to address, was this move from the dualism between the intelligible and the sensible, the ideal and the copy, to this subterranean dualism. This is the second paragraph, about 4 or 5 lines down. And Deleuze has this shift to a subterranean dualism, quote, between that which receives the action of the idea and that which eludes its action. And so, whereas we interpret this between copies and the simulacra, as opposed to the ideal and, like, the representations of that ideal, I kind of want to bring up this subject of, like, how do we understand the idea in this context when we shift away from Platonism into the sort of new dualism that Deleuze espouses through these sort of, like, paradoxes, right, between the two series, the signifier and the signified, and through each of the series he kind of traces, it seems like, this dualism I talked about before. So that was just the first point we wanted to bring up, was the shift away from Platonism and this classic duality between the ideal and the representation towards this more subterranean chaosmos and how we approach it.
Well, that's a pretty seductive epistemology, between the model and its copy. We all tend to think that way. This is why Deleuze is so fascinating, and why he's also so maddening, because he's so counterintuitive. He just sort of pulls the rug out for the way in which we're all used to kind of carving up the world and sorting things out. You have our little boxes that have a unique sort of categories. We like subjects and predicates and genera and species and that kind of thing. So everything is somehow determining what the subdomain is of something else. We're always keeping in this realm of domains. And so we're drawing little diagrams and diagrams. Within diagrams, we want to know how this fits there, and it's all a kind of it's all a kind of topographical way of viewing things. Deleuze wants to say, don't look at the topographic map. Look at the way in which everything is changing and shifting. So it's almost like he wants philosophy to be a sort of time-lapse photography of the whole surface of things. To be able to see the motion, when you look at time-lapse photography, you think, well, that's all familiar. That's what I saw, but it's not what I saw. I'm seeing what I saw in an entirely different way. Still, we're used to, picturing reality in still images that are momentary and then captured later. And one of Deleuze's whole hermeneutical methods, especially which he really goes full bore with when he collaborates with Guattari, and we'll see that in 1,000 Plateaus. He talks about the apparatus of capture. This idea of thought as being an apparatus of capture, whereby that which is wild somehow becomes trophy-like, and those trophy-like ideas are what we call great books, great thoughts and clusters. This sort of metaphysical structure of the world as we know it.
I think it's worth pointing out, though, that in this passage, Deleuze isn't contrasting a Platonic dualism to a subterranean dualism. He's saying that is Plato's dualism.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Like, that's not the overturning of Plato. That's actually just what he says is going on in Plato. I mean, it's sort of like, maybe like gives the seed to it or whatever, but it's not. That's not like the place of the overturning.
No, right. It's not about digging under the surface.
Right.
And finding the substrates, you know, to really explain what is. I mean, that's what the theory of ideology does. But this is, well, ask you what is he doing?
Oh, I'd like to kind of talk about it in terms of relating it to, as he does, Allison through the looking glass. The bottom of page 1, he gives these two qualifiers. The second one, a pure becoming without measure, a veritable becoming mad, which never rests. Now page 2. It moves in both directions at once. It always eludes the present, causing future and past more and less. And he talks about Alice becoming larger and then becoming smaller.
Right.
Yeah. And then on the top of page 3, he discusses the reversal of becoming. Right. It's sort of this. He's kind of inviting, like he's kind of like describing what madness is, but through Alice's perspective. Right.
Okay. Well, but is it looking at the world through Alice's? I mean, who is Alice?
Right.
You know, this is not Deltai's inoculation learning to kind of experience the world others because Alice is, you know, a fictive figure. Alice is a postulate.
Right.
And also, like, one thing too, like with all the dualities he draws up, I don't want to like impose duality that doesn't exist. But when he draws a distinction between chronos and aeon, chronos doing like the present manifest time, more like materiality of it, it seems, and the aeon being the sort of ad infinitum to the past and the future. This shift from an appeal to a transcendental subject that Kant does, and also in like theology an appeal to God, Kant saying no, we have to like acknowledge the pure becoming, this process in which like we are immersed in this recursive dynamism in which like we make a proposition, but in so doing, not only do we evoke the sense, but the sense that we evoke shapes our experience of it.
Right.
I don't know if that makes, but it's this sort of recursion that enfolds in on itself kind of thing, as opposed to saying like, it's the ideal. He says no, it's simulacra copies that sort of, yeah.
Right.
What's happening?
Just ask.
Turn it up.
It's the size of the living room. Yeah, please. Can you do that? Project that? I don't have my connected. Let's just watch that. I was trying to think what was it. I couldn't remember what I was going to play tonight.
What's the title?
White Rabbit. The Jefferson Airplane. You got an HDMI port on yours?
It's pretty loud, though.
Huh?
This is pretty loud.
Okay.
People used to tell me my obsession with detail was crazy. Just like they told me eating chicken for breakfast was crazy. Well, you know who's not crazy?
Chicken for breakfast. It's not as crazy as you think. Try the new egg white grill from Chick-fil-A.
I saw this song performed by the Deleuze. It's a song more
Wow.
She's read Deleuze. Feed your hair. Feed your hair. I like hair. Well, that's
Sense, yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's all good. Seems totally appropriate. I wish we actually had taken the time to look at, because we had watched Alice in Wonderland, and it would have been nice to draw segments from it, because there were points, right, where like, where he puts on the glasses of one of the birds and looks at the other bird, or she does, and it's a mirror. So the bird that she's looking at now has eyes, because she is looking into the mirror of its face with the glasses of the other bird she put on. So there's this sort of like, this infinite sort of process in which, you know, two mirrors are put in front of each other and it shapes each other. It's not like the ideal that compresses on the object.
This is the Disney version?
Yeah. Yeah, 1951.
I'll just actually started writing the screenplay. Then got fired from because he was making too many allusions, I think, to the darker interpretations of Carol. At the time. So like, because I teach a lot of children's literature, and so the Freudian influence in the 1930s makes literary critics, they come up with the interpretation that Lewis Carroll is a pervert, and that's the whole sort of falling down a rabbit hole, and then the rebirth into the garden. The whole edible thing gets masked, and then there's this sort of reputation that gets associated between Lewis Carroll and this weird break in the relationship with the Alice Liddell's family. He did propose marriage. But he was in the pervert section. It was like he was riffing on Alice scholarship.
You want to move to 21?
Yeah, want me to just read it?
Sure. Okay. Yeah, second paragraph, page 21. What is considered?
You. Okay. I thought this was really a key point in understanding sense. Maybe I'm wrong, but okay. Let's consider the complex status of sense, or that which is expressed. On one hand, it does not exist outside the proposition, which expresses it. What is expressed does not exist outside its expression. This is why we cannot say that sense exists, but rather that it inheres or subsists. So, we kind of saw this as being that sense isn't necessarily a thing. It's something that's within things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what he actually uses a word here. What is it? It's something, right? Eloquent talks about that.
It's always an italicized. It's like a liquid.
A liquid?
No, eloquent. It's
Eloquent.
It's Latin for something.
It's on 22 at the top. Sense is the boundary between propositions.
Yeah.
And things. Exactly this boundary between proposition and things is this eloquent at once extra being and appearance that is this minimum of being which fits appearances. It's this sense that events.
And this is sort of kind of like with this a liquid concept. I mean, the
Eloquent has nothing to do with liquid.
oh, okay, eloquent. Sorry.
Yeah, it's spelled like a liquid.
Yeah, eloquent. Okay, eloquent.
Maybe it's supposed to go way back to the origin of life. It could, but I don't think so.
Yeah, I'm not trying to make it anything more than what it means to use it for. But it seems that like if the ontic reality of sense is sustained through its subsistence and iterating propositions, like how does sense retain? Does this make any sense at all? So if I like make a claim or proposition and there's the
I'll
sense
tell you you're full of it.
yeah.
Right. But well, but this is what I really wanted to say. I say, okay, I see what you're trying to say. And then I put in a but, okay? So for every one of those words, there's a kind of eloquent. Yeah. I mean, because this is the whole point that basically sense is a series of point singularities. It's not like this wraps it up, this concludes it. This is not a bracket that goes at the end of the dots and the pluses. The sense is really more the dots. The dots that keep on going because you have to keep extending the dots out into infinity. Just like we're doing right now. We're having a conversation. You were kind of pushing forward something, and I kind of break that, and I say, "But it's this, and it's that." You say, "No, it's this, it's that." I would say, "Well, no, it's Roger." But that's okay.
It is right.
And Roger belongs to the series of sense.
Like when you think about on the top of page 22, when he says sense is both the expressible or the expressed in the proposition and the attribute state of affairs.
Right.
It's almost as saying sense is both the signifier and the signified at the same exact time.
Yeah, that's good though. But sense is not the same as the signifier because there's always this double series. So it is both the expressed, that is the point singularity, but it's also the expressible. In other words, the possible generation of more point singularities, more dots, to keep going on without closing off the brackets.
Could you say the sense is something like an opening in like a speech act?
All right, now let's be diagnostic here, okay? So take every word you just said, right? Okay, you know what you just said?
It could have been the Holy Spirit, but probably wasn't.
Okay, but you feel confident that you were intelligible. By the way, just give you confirmation you were intelligible.
In that case, yes.
So, I mean, each one of those points breaks. I mean, there's always a kind of instance of signification that goes on. You know? And like each one of those is like, okay, what did I say? What did I mean? Well, that's sense. You know? The sense is coming out of it. You know, the sense he calls this extra being, which means that it's always something that kind of floats around. I mean, the sense is that which floats around the floating signifier. I mean, sense is that which flies around the floating signifier. You know, the floating signifier is constant. The signification is always sliding around. You know, it's like, what does this really mean? You know, it's pretty easy to kind of talk the language of denotation when you've got a single word in front of you. Like I say, here is a bottle. This is a bottle. Denotation, a sense of definition. A Wittgenstein. This is what I mean when I say bottle. You know, but if I, start talking about, my romantic visions of a future utopian reality, when American democracy, goes up in flames in some kind of twilight of the gods and new heaven and earth, comes down and so forth, and I've got this vision of Ryan sitting on the throne, with a wearing a pizza crown.
A pizza crown.
A pizza crown. Yeah.
That's very specific.
Very egalitarian. That there's no denotatum of that, okay? But there's a sense of that. There's a sense of that that is always contextualized by this conversation when I'm saying, the fact the way that words can flow from each other. If I talked about a truth crown, well, it might make a little less sense, but makes no less sense to use this whole notion of crown anarchy, which is an image which has a kind of sense of everything he talks about, chaos and the productive nature of chaos and the genesis of sense within the midst of chaos. So, I mean, sense is always that kind of that flying vapor over the floating signifier. Because the signified over the sliding signifier. The signifier is always sliding around, this way and this way. And there's this kind of cloud of sense that kind of hovers about. And we can visualize that, basically the testimony, to whether sense is being generated is we can, nod our heads, it's like, yeah, I follow you. Even though we don't follow the other person in any kind of logic sense of it, because, you very often ask me when the Holy Spirit descends upon me with these tongues of fire, and you'll say, oh, what, can you say that again? Or we can't say it again. We can never say it again. We can never play it again. That's the very nature of sense. Sense cannot be repeated.
That's why I stopped asking. That's why I stopped asking the question.
Right. Yeah. So, sorry.
Well, we had come up with this example of like sarcasm.
Yeah.
where when you speak in when you speak in sarcasm, like the other person follows you because they can read up, like they have the sense of what you're saying, even though what you're saying is not what the sense is. Like the words that you're signifying are not.
Doesn't sarcasm somehow carry the sense?
Yeah,
That's what makes it sarcasm.
Yeah. And so when you think of Deleuze and what he's trying to say with sense, you can think about it in those terms that make it easier for you. When you say something sarcastically, everyone can pick up on that. You're kind of keyed into it. You have that sense over that signifying, of those signifying words. You have that greater sense of what the person next to you is saying.
Would you distinguish that from, so in the earlier book, he was talking about laughter, and he was talking about Bergson, Bergson's book on laughter, I think is where it's getting from. And he says at one point, he says, what I'm talking about is not irony. And so irony has this doubling going on. So I'm asking, would you distinguish sarcasm between the kind of doubling that goes on with irony? Does there need to be doubling for sarcasm to be sarcasm?
Oh, I see. I mean, the doubling, as far as I interpret it, is in the sense that sarcasm is the tone of what is said, in which that would be like being corporal. Whereas, like,
But is the tone quality? See, it's the whole logic of sense. We have to get away from the whole predicative structure of substances and attributes or things in their qualities, right?
okay.
I mean, perhaps.
So the sarcasm would be like secondary then, right? Where the tonality is inflection of.
Well, but you can't. There is no such thing as sarcasm in a single word. Right?
No. But it's conveyed through like a proposition.
Yeah.
You know, like if I make the claim like, man, this is boring. Like there's a difference between like the content or like the mixture.
Let me hear what you say, man, this is boring, but you say really in a kind of enthusiastic way.
Right. That would be sarcasm.
Yeah, that would be the
This
sarcasm.
is boring.
Yeah.
Oh, this,
Guys, this is a really great conversation.
That's what it
especially if you're having sex with a girl,
Or we kind of have another example too. When you're watching a movie, like like a horror film, and you know what's going to happen next, even though the characters within the film don't know what's happening next. You kind of have a sense of the event. Like you have a sense of what's going to occur on the surface level, what's about to unfold. You can have a sense of what's happening within the theater, within a theater of actions, of temporality, and then you have a sense, and then it happens as a moment of singularity, and then you can continue to have that sense of what's going to happen, and then every time it comes true, every time it happens, you have that event. Move on.
Okay. Well, there is one question I had in that regard, in that if you're watching a movie and have a sense of what's going to happen, outside of the awareness of actors, what is this dimension of like vantage point of sense?
That's the classic definition of dramatic irony, is when the audience has one and the actors on stage.
Right. Okay, so this is almost more like a more exaggerated example of the sarcasm too.
But there's a difference between when the audience knows more than the actors and when just because all movies essentially follow the same structures, anticipating, right?
Right. Like a procedural, like a TV procedural.
But see, that to me seems almost like too structural to make sense. Like that's just like some sort of like recognition habits or patterns or something, right?
That's what I was thinking too. It's almost like guess, psychotechnology of the standardization of cultural artifacts like TV shows and movies.
Yeah, that's how I was going to say it, but I didn't want to seem esoteric.
This is on page 71. So this is after he's been talking about sense, because I read like half of page 70. And this is where he starts talking about structuralists and structuralism. Just at the top of the page, authors referred to as structuralists by recent practice may have no essential point in common other than this: sense, regarded not at all as appearance but as surface effect and position effect, and produced by the circulation of the empty square in the structural series. The place of the dummy, the place of the key, the blind spot, the floating signifier, the value degree zero, the off stage or absent cause, etc. Structuralism, whether consciously or not, celebrates new findings of Stoic and Carolian inspiration. Structure is in fact a machine for the production of incorporeal sense. So there was like he's kind of like aligning sense with structuralism right there.
Yeah, but I mean, one could say that in a weird way, this whole project of the logic of sense is structural. But it's, in a sense, taking structuralism where structuralism is never going before it. Because he's saying that there's something that goes on in structure which structuralism doesn't recognize, and that is the production of sense. Because it's the very nature of structuralism that structure always has to manifest. And so it has to manifest in language. It has to manifest like in classic structural theory and role and spoken language, or it also it becomes the way in which writing takes place according to but it's that way in which it gets expressed. And remember, it gets expressed in a whole variety of ways. That's the whole insight of Chomsky's generative grammar. Is that the structure always is able to give rise to a more that cannot be contained or reduced or rolled back into the original structure from which it came. So there's always this infinite generative possibility of structure. And that infinite generative possibility, when it comes forth in that particular moment, at that particular instant of expression, is what we call sense.
So in a sense, he's just unifying. He's just saying this is what structuralists all have in common. Is that they're using other terms, floating signifier or whatever, to talk about what he means by sense.
Yeah, right. But I think he wants to go beyond signification. I mean, within the structuralist ambit, there is structure, there is manifestation, there is discourse, and there is signification. And sense is always beyond signification. Signification always requires at least an offer of signifier. And the thing is, about sense, you can't specify sense in terms of signifier. That's why I was using, the language of kind of the spectral nature of, intelligibility. That I can use a word, as in the case of sarcasm. But the word has no content. The word has no defining attributes in itself without the sense that I give it. And that's where irony or sarcasm, or you might say, even the kind of theatrical affects. So in some ways, affect theory, which I think is, even though it's being touted right now, it's still very much in its kind of crude state. Affect theory is an effort to try to give sense to communication in ways that, you know, theory which has been trained by language has some structures of language about it. The minute you name an affect, it's not really an affect. That's one of the problems. But, you know, I think Deleuze calls it, somewhat pleased with the effort placed of affect.
Kind of like you think about emojis, like the emoji itself, there's no signification to it. Like there's no identity to an emoji, but you give it a sense in the way that you use it. Like there's no definition of an emoji. It's in the way in which you use it, or it's the way in which you give it that emotion. Like you give the emoji.
Emojis are always very, I've got a program, Bitmoji, I don't even see I use it. In text all we can customize your emojis. Look like you, I've got emojis. My wife and I communicate.
And they're just symbols, and yet you can have a whole conversation using symbols by the sense in which you give it.
I think what affect theory is sort of trying to do is to move away from this kind of Freudian disciplined self, where we're thinking about the subject in and of itself. Because once you're thinking about the subject, you're in signification process. And affect theory is trying to find a way to talk about intra or intersubjectivity without reverting always back to the subject itself. And so they're trying to draw on Deleuze all the time for this, for sense in his sense, to talk about a different sort of political realm outside the subject.
I think Deleuze is naturally anti-identity, like identity formation.
Oh, yeah.
And the second you identify something, you stop the point of like you stop the singularity from happening. Like you stop the infinite singularities, and then you just box it off into one thing. And identity is inherently like one person. Like identity is very singular in the sense that it's like an I. Like I identify, like you identify. Like it's very personal in a sense. And so when you identify it as something, you're saying I am, or I was, or I am going to be. But in that sense, you boxed yourself off. Like you can never outgrow that identity. And so where sense comes in is the transgression of identity, because you can give a sense to anything. And so identity.
It makes identity. I wouldn't say it's a transgression, but it makes identity. It problematizes it.
Yeah, because you can give identity to all things, and you can change that identity at any time. So yeah, it's like passive.
Right. I think this also plays in, we don't have to go to page 19, he talks about the dimension of sense when he's talking about propositions, and he emphasizes the neutrality of it, in which I interpret it as more of like an emergent phenomenon, in which sense is like the ontic, quote unquote, reality of sense is only founded through the recursive process of subject and object, so to speak, right? As soon as that dissolves, sense is sort of like this neutral emergence from this dynamism between, I can make a proposition to denote these things, but also those things that I denote like that. I don't even know how to talk about it, to be honest. But there is this sort of like groundedness that the neutrality of sense kind of establishes and steers away from affirming identities.
Well, this book is full of, little zingers.
Yeah.
And I think we have one of these zingers here in the paragraph where he says, sense is the fourth dimension of the proposition. And so, what does that mean exactly? The fourth dimension is something that really doesn't belong to the dimension that we're used to talking about, right? But it's there, it inheres. space-time continuum that Einstein posits is not something that intuitively, we're accustomed to grasping. I don't even know we recognize it and say, yeah, that's the way the world is. And now we live in a universe, according to string theory, which we have fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth dimensions, and postulate up to 11th dimensions. We have no idea of what that would mean, except what we know is that everything that we consider to be dimensional reality somehow is open to something else, what is pushing upon it, which is eliciting something from it, which is bringing it into a trajectory that wasn't anticipated. So I'm going to say the cosmos, according to string theory, is infinitely eventful. I think in the way that Deleuze wants us to understand. The proposition is, you might call it sort of bare unit of intelligibility, right? We can put something in terms of X is Y, we say, which is the propositional format. We can say, yes, now that's what it is, that's what it means. Well, of course, that's not what it means. That's what it only means for now, where we've got this point of recognition where we can begin to deconstruct it, revise it, revisit it, rethink it, redirect it, reopen the problem or the question and so forth. That's what science is doing. So-called paradigm shifts, are nothing more than where structures of meaning, all of a sudden we finally say, okay, I can't work within that. Those assumptions no longer operative. I've got to have another way of trying to, contextualize it. And so, a whole different, way of theorizing more. But theorizing is only part of the proposition process. Most propositions are not theories. Propositions are just basically efforts to try to, take two singularities and somehow give them some sort of, stable relationship with each other. But it's interesting because Deleuze says, further on that when we produce sense, we're not creating stability. We're creating what he calls metastability, meaning that it's really dynamically unstable, but in the same ways we're able to intelligently recognize in a way that you and I can talk about it. We can even philosophize about it. So that we're not just throwing up our hands and saying, yeah, I don't get it. In some ways, that the fundamental semantic meanings, the kind of basic unit of meaning for the logic of sense is I get it. But then you say, well, what do you get? Well, that becomes a lot of work. And to be able to say that makes sense and be able to say I get it. Being able to articulate the propositional, follow-on to what it is I get. Now you may not be able to do it.
And that's why he says it doesn't exist. Sense doesn't exist.
But it's substance.
Right.
Yeah.
It's almost like a corollary to meaning.
So, Roger, can psychedelics give a sense?
Well, okay. So, I always wonder about the ways that people talk about Deleuze and psychedelics, and even that the growing and shortening Alice, that actually doesn't feel like a phenomenon to me that really happens a lot in the psychedelic experience. But the psychedelic experience is named as such because it means a mind manifestation. Right? So if it really is a mind manifestation of something called the unconscious in the way that he's talking about it here, I think that it's very psychedelic what he's talking about. Does that make sense? I think that sense in this, the in-betweenness of sense, I think that there's a problem in the paper on this next week, but this is a problem within the idea of psychedelic therapy, right? Is to what extent is there a carryover of Freudianism within the knowledge of psychedelic therapy itself? Now, some people will just reject all psychedelic therapy, which that's fine too, but that's a kind of different discussion. He's always talking about speeding up and slowing down, and those are kinds of different drug-induced sorts of states. And I associate with the type of psychedelics themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be psychedelics mixed with some other things.
But could you say, I mean, let's get away from chemical substances. You know, and let's look at the question of mind manifestation. Because, you know, however you access the deeper mind, I mean, Freud thought this was the unconscious was. You know, the unconscious is really, I think, according to the majority of modern theories, kind of limit notion. It's like we can't go beyond that limited language. You know, there's language. I mean, it's in a lot of ways Freudian theory and Kantian theory are very, you know, are very closely paired with each other in a lot of respects. Though you have a different kind of unconscious in say Lacan, who talks about the unconscious as structured like language. So I mean, in some ways, all kind of linguistic availability in Lacan is what we mean by the unconscious. Lacan doesn't like to talk about it as this kind of dark sea, you know, out of which arise things we can recognize. He doesn't like that kind of topographical model, which is prevalence in Freud. I mean, for Lacan, the unconscious is something that's always, you know, operative within, it inheres within the linguistic process itself. Your psychoanalytic, you know,
They might, Deleuze might actually like the original term psychotomimetic a little bit better, right? Which is like mimicking psychosis or being crazy. He might have more affinity with that, with what he's talking about here. He definitely has affinity with Artaud, and Artaud in Peyote Dance. That's the book. Like that's because Artaud is schizophrenic and he's being treated by Lacan, and Lacan says that Artaud is untreatable, and then he kind of makes himself better. Artaud does so. But when Artaud talks about psychedelic experiences, it's really, really unique, and I think that would jive really well with what Deleuze is talking about. He quotes that letter that Artaud wrote about where he's like talking about how much he hates Jabberwocky. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen him yet quote Peyote Dance, which is the book that's Artaud's psychedelic.
yeah, you guys got some more things to say?
There's just like one little anecdote thing I just wanted to add. We have a lot prepared. We can go wherever. Yeah. I would like to.
I've got a few more things to say.
I would like to talk about the incorporeal double.
Okay.
Yeah, the incorporeal double and the Dionysian desire machine. Yeah. Someone talked about like the last page or something. But there was something I want to mention just for like food for ducks. I thought this was interesting. I think kind of plugs into this notion of time dilation on psychedelics, where the measurement of time and space is affected by motion, space contraction and time dilation. So in terms of like reality, our very act of measuring something is affected by motion itself. So I thought that was very like, you know, Deleuzian in the sense that it relativizes things and sort of makes it categorizable.
And that concept is really useful. Like when you can see every snowflake individually that's falling at once, that's a very psychedelic thing. Or hear a leaf blow through every single leaf on every tree around you at the same time, in their particularity and in their simultaneity. That's very psychedelic to me.
So is there like that? Is there that rupture though then? Because like that still happens in the moment, right? It's not like past or future as in the ion moment or aeon moment. So how is, you see what I'm asking? Is it like a rupture?
I'm thinking of like the Greek god, like so not just eternity, but like once you're in Chronos, there's a kind of linearity in a past, present, and future, and ion is, and if you could take the past, the present, and future, all of it, and put it in an envelope, ion is the envelope. I think he uses envelope as that metaphor or something. And so it's not, I mean, you can see he's drawing on Bergson, on Dure, lived experience and virtual experience of time, but he's complicating Bergson at the same time. I don't know if that's helpful or.
Yeah, you haven't read Bergson, it might be a little bit obfuscating, but I mean, Bergson has this distinction between Tom, T-E-M-P-S, which means more chronos, but it's a little more subtle because Tom is, he said that basically the way we divide time up according to clock time and material time, it's always material present, so to speak, and the way we access the ray, which is similar to there's always the notion of ion. That this is kind of in the internal time intuition is this whole notion that basically the goal of philosophy is to intuit the interior of time, and this is not time immemorial. It's time, you might say. Well, it is time immemorial in the other sense of the word "im," that is totally indwelling within memory. So the fullness of time is somehow contained within memory. And of course, all these French thinkers love, proofs, memories of things past. This kind of quest for pure time, through personal memory, and experience the linking of memory together. But that's why memory is always kind of like this kaleidoscope of fragments that have to be recovered and kept. Augustine in the Confessions is doing the same thing. So this kind of exercise as a literary device is very familiar with Western thought. But he's trying to kind of theorize it in a deeper way. For its own, the problem of philosophy is the problem of time. And it is for Heidegger too, but also for Deleuze. But Deleuze isn't so much interested in somehow finding a philosophical way of talking about the unity of time, but trying to find a philosophical way of talking about the way in which time is temporally distributed in all sorts of different ways. So, that's
Oh, okay. One corporal one. We can talk about corporal double. Corporal double. We can talk about that one. Also,
Edibility. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Is it between non-stable things and
Yeah.
edibility?
Yeah. Whichever way you want. Nate, I don't know what you want.
Yeah, let's start with the distinction between mixture bodies and
Okay.
corporal bodies.
Okay. You want me to read it? Okay. Page 10. Right at the bottom, second paragraph, sort of in the middle, when he starts talking about Stoicism. As a general rule, only little girls understand Stoicism. They have the sense of the event and release an incorporeal double. But it happens sometimes that a little boy is a stutterer and left-handed and thus conquers sense as the double sense or direction of the surface. And apparently Carol hates little boys. At anyways, no, with the incorporeal double, okay, I was wondering, and this might be completely wrong, but my first thought about this, and with watching the movie, being familiar with the story, is that is the incorporeal double. There's Alice who's under the tree, and then there's the Alice that we follow, who goes down the rabbit hole. Is that her incorporeal double?
Yeah, I think you could say that. I mean, that's,
Oh, good.
I mean, but what is, but even if it is, what does that mean? What is
It means that she has that ability. She has
well,
that.
you have that ability. I mean, you know.
But I'm a boy.
Well, I don't quite get the gender part. Maybe you do, you know, Carol.
But is he saying that girls are more attuned to that, to stoicism? Well, he is saying that, but
Maybe you're literary critic.
is he saying that that's a part of stoicism, that incorporeal double that's able to go into the mind, go into these
I
different worlds?
think so. I don't, because I'm not as attuned to stoicism as I am to Alice's adventures in Wonderland.
Okay.
But Alice, I mean, there are a lot of ways to think about it. She is maybe less of a, but we don't know that she's dreaming until the end of the book.
Right.
So, but at the end of chapter 1, she starts having this whole identity crisis where she
Right.
doesn't know who she is anymore, and there's a lot of doublings. There's some mirror going.
But she loses her proper name.
She loses her. She doesn't know who she is anymore because she's growing so fast. And then she likes to chide herself, and she does this a lot throughout the book. She's got a kind of like a super ego who's like telling her don't cry, but she loses her control over herself. And then when she meets the caterpillar, he asks who she is, and she's like, I don't even know.
Right.
So I think that he's making a gender comment about that. There's also that book on semiotics, or the preliminary theory of the young girl, which complicates this because it theorizes the young girl, but it says it's not gendered to theorize the young girl. So I'm just going to throw that in there. And it says that the most corporate executive today is a young girl, that we're all young girls. So there's some other layer to that conversation. It's true that Carol didn't really, like, he's really drawing on Lewis Carroll criticism, but he doesn't really like little boys that much. And the pig.
Yeah.
What that means about, I mean, that's a kind of essentialist version. So,
I personally think that's just kind of a side comment based on what kind of, you know, side he pulled out of whatever, you know, Carol criticism is represented. I mean, I don't think it's really central to the kind of discussion he's developing right here. You know, because the theme that runs throughout this are the two theories. There's always doubling is always what's going on, okay? And you can't. And doubling doesn't mean mimicking. Doubling means that in some ways that there are always two of us going on. There are these double series. You know, there is, you know, the real Carl Raschke, you know, what we take to be the real Carl Raschke, is might call the sort of, you know, extra dimensional Carl Raschke, the extra Carl Raschke, the extra of Carl Raschke. But that's only from this particular perceptual perspective, you know, because you know, we tend to navigate within one particular series and look at the other series as the outside, when in fact the two series are always going on together. These are two series that have to do with the production of sense. I mean, it's a term we haven't really talked about. We'll get into that what Deleuze really means by the donation of sense. You can't have the donation of sense without these two theories, without the stumbling block. So, I mean, I mean, again, where does he get the kind of analog for these two theories? Well, it has to do with experience of time, the past and present. We're always, in a sense, looking back. Our mind is going step by step back, and we're always anticipating the future. We're saying, now if I do this, and this will happen, and so forth. We're always projecting. I mean, Heidegger was right on that. The Dasein is always temporality, which is always projecting. But what Heidegger does again, what Deleuze does, is it's projecting is also projecting backwards. Heidegger calls these the ecstasies of time. Okay, but in some both of these ecstasies are not really being outside of ourselves in the literal sense of the word ecstasis, but they're an experience of these doublings. There is no point from which we experience it per se. In reality, that's just a moving point because we're always looking back and looking forward. That's what it means, to be conscious subjects. But what we are is simply this point that is sliding back and forth between these two theories, which are going out directions. And that's what we mean by.
And he keeps referring back to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a theme throughout the book and in this book in Alice in Wonderland, his interpretation of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you could. Anybody see the movie Alice in the Looking Glass? One with Johnny Depp. Did you guys see that? I mean, I thought it was kind of interesting. It's so un-Disney-like in a lot of ways, but it was interesting because I mean, it did capture a lot of sense, and I think in a lot of ways, Through the Looking Glass is a lot more Deleuzian than Alice in Wonderland is, because this whole notion of the Looking Glass is just kind of doubling back. You might want to say that Alice in Wonderland is about the future, Alice in the Looking Glass is about the past, but the two are always right together. Alice is, which reminds me of association of a good schizophrenic way of life. But you get this passage where he said a philosopher is like a louse on the skin. I'll show you that. I gotta find it. That's what it means to philosophize. He says to be like a louse with a tick.
Alice is also seven. She's named as being seven in Through the Looking Glass, which means that she is 5 or 6 in Alice's Adventures. But Alice's Adventures, if you remember, her turning into the snake itself. There's a whole bunch of sexual stuff going on. Most of it is her. She's mistaken for a snake when her neck gets really long.
Okay. Why don't we take a break? Thank you guys.
So I didn't know what to say.
Thank you guys. Didn't have a follow-up.
Start looking at books.